Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Let me start this session formally. I can see that few participants, they have joined, and I hope participants will keep on joining. Most probably it's a relaxing mode due to vacations, summer vacations. Dear all SISB members and participants, Assalamu alaikum and very warm welcome to this webinar arranged by Saudi Society for Medical Education, Riyadh Office, Journal Club. I hope that all you can hear me well. I'm Dr. Shazia Iqbal, Chairperson, Organizer for Continued Professional Development Activities at Saudi Arabia for Medical Education. Our society is very much keen to develop the teaching and assessment abilities among medical faculty through continued improvement in quality of teaching, assessment, and strategic integration of technology. We encourage the use of cutting-edge technologies and innovation in medical education, and this is our 6th webinar by SESME to accomplish our goal. Medical education is intended to promote learning and ensure that medical students and trainees develop proficiency in the broad competencies essential for serving various healthcare needs in their communities. We believe that medical education practice, planning, and reforms should be theoretically grounded and evidence-based. However, particularly the faculty in medical education may not utilize this empirical knowledge to improve their curriculum development and instructional design practices. For instance, medical educators use multimedia mostly for delivering lectures in the form of PowerPoint presentations. However, if they are fully trained and expert to utilize these skills to the maximum capacity, the quality of teaching and learning can be enhanced dramatically. This webinar will highlight the theoretical rationale of multimedia instructional design principles, and it will emphasize that how to apply the multimedia instructional design principles for preparing effective presentation leading to active and meaningful learning. The topic for today's presentation is multimedia principles and instructional design in teaching and learning, and I'm honored and delighted to present our distinguished speaker, Dr. Thurayah Katan. Very warm welcome, Dr. Thurayah Katan, to SESME Riyadh office. Dr. Thurayah Katan holds a bachelor degree in medicine and surgery from King Saud University. Afterwards, she has pursued a career in medical education where she received a master's degree in medical education and PhD in medical education with a focus on assessment, the validity of using multimedia in MCQs. She has started her work in Saudi Commission for Health Specialties in 2010 as a medical educator specialist, where she has established the Department of Medical Education, and throughout the years with the support of Commission and senior colleagues, she has established the assessment unit. She is serving as head of assessment unit and working on the development and quality improvement of examination, licensing exam, national promotion, and board exams. Currently, she is Director of Continuous Formative Assessment, where she is reviewing current practices in training and looking to improve the quality of postgrad health professional residency training through formative assessment. Her research interest lies in assessment, formative assessment, multimedia in written examination, and assessment validity. She has participated in many local and international workshops and events as a speaker in field of medical education, assessment, item writing, and has contributed to faculty development. Very warm welcome, Dr. Thurayah Katan again. And I shall be moderating this session. Participants, if you have any question, you can write in chat box or you can raise your hand by end of session. We shall have 15 minutes at the end for question answers. So over to you, Dr. Thurayah.
Thank you, Dr. Shadia, for this nice and welcoming. And welcome everybody who took the time to come. I know it's 8 at night if you're in Riyadh and it's late. Hopefully this will be a nice presentation, and it's recorded. It's about multimedia learning and cognitive overload. And if you have any questions, Dr. Shadia, inshallah, will monitor it. If there's any problem in the sound, then please notify me, Dr. Shadia, please. Shazia, thank you. So we'll start with our topic is a multimedia principle and instructional design. and teaching and learning. So most of these principles are based in learning and teaching. And then from it, we try to see if it's applicable to assessment. But most of these, the background is from teaching and learning from the literature. So let's start. Okay. So I think general objective is that I'm going to just discuss the potential drawbacks in multimedia, using it in teaching and learning. What are the good things and bad things? The focus is mainly on identifying what are the principles of multimedia learning and instructional design, and talking about what is cognitive overload and how to use it and to avoid it, I mean. And then you want to explore the factors to consider when you select the multimedia materials. Now, the slides might be condensed, some of them might be filled, and it's just there for your reference. So I might just go through some quick ones because this one you will have it later on. So generally, just as a beginning, so we can all have a general or agreed concept or mental model is what's the definition. So just generally about multimedia. So just in the Oxford Dictionary, multimedia is something, it's a medium of expression or it's a communication where you could use it if you're going to use audio and video, could be used in computers. So it incorporates audio, videos, and you can interact with it. The Amy Guide defined it a bit as a courseware which integrates videos, audios, and maybe graphical materials with text and number operations. So the idea is that you have a media, so if it was audio, video, or image, and you can have text with it. And so generally, if we're going to talk about what are the benefits of multimedia and teaching and learning, there's according to literature, there's so many benefits. So it can be interactive, you can clarify difficult concepts, you can have better retention of learning and teaching with the students, you can provide more information than the text in a different manner. It acts sometimes as a motivational role where you can capture your students' attention or difficult concepts and complex concepts. You can demonstrate realistic scenarios through using videos, simulation, illustration, and so on. In testing, it can be used as a flexible and dynamic with your items, with your MCQs. It's a way of uplifting your MCQs to measure higher order thinking. It helps to reduce guessing and maybe sometimes construct irrelevant variants in some instances. And you can improve the fidelity of your item scenario and then maybe increase your validity of your items. You can align it more closely to your curriculum if you're having things to do with more clinical or you have some visual aspects in some of your specialties like pathology, histology, so you could use that. It's more representation of the actual work, because what you see in the clinical is what you want to apply also in your assessment. And it can be perceived by students as being realistic and more interesting. And sometimes it could be intimidating, so it might have a negative effect. So this is where it comes to the drawbacks. So in teaching and learning, you might have copyright issues in both teaching and testing. So that's maybe the big issues. It will depend on students' learning styles because not all the students are visuals, not all of them are auditory and so on. Not all students can process the same image or audio equally, and they won't use it the same way. Sometimes it might be very difficult for them. It can be time consuming, maybe expensive, and you might require different backgrounds of experts in multimedia, instructional design, you might need IT and so on. In testing, the drawback is that if you don't have a good quality multimedia, it's going to affect your assessment. Technical aspects, the size, the edit, how you're going to copy, transfer, and security. Sometimes emotionally, it involves the candidate and the exam, and it might make them anxious or more tired, which is a negative feedback, or it's a construct that you don't want to add into your assessment. And it can alter students' mental model and attention. It can be unpredictable because I'll show you some examples where it can act favorably or negatively onto the item, and sometimes it's difficult to develop a large multimedia bank. Either way, the idea that we have to just understand what is multimedia and what is cognitive load theory. So it's a way of providing a theoretical foundation for designing instructional material to best enhance learning. It's a way to have insight on how the brain processes visual and verbal information. Difficulties a student may encounter when learning new materials. It addresses that area, and it is designing visual materials to enhance efficiency and reduce cognitive overload. So regarding any picture, So when you have pictures, you can have it either a static, which is a still picture, or you can have it as a dynamic picture, which is something that is movable. So when you have a static image, it's usually a single frame. So it's just one image or one picture, as opposed to the dynamic one, where it's usually a series of frames, and that's what causes the movement. The static image usually is taken from a flow of motion. So you have so many images, but you're just picking one image. So there's no change in that item or in that image. As in the motion one, the dynamic, there's a continuous movement and change. Now, this is, I think, important when we're going to talk about why putting multimedia in testing or learning and as opposed to text. Because, for example, if you're going to have, let's say, a dermatology image of a rash, if you have it as a text, you might be guided to specify certain aspects of it or characteristic, as where's the location, what's its color, or what's the presentation. But when you have it as a picture, you have more information given in the picture that is not described in the text. And you might have the orientation of it, you might have the direction, the size will be much clearer, and so on. And so for this, you usually gain it at once. When you have information from the picture, you gain it immediately at once as you see the picture. So we're going to go now to what are some of the important concepts. So the thing that we want to, about multimedia and instructional design is the purpose of it is you want to have what you call a shared mental model or mental representation. And a mental model representation is your own or personal understanding of whatever you're seeing, of the text, of the picture. So when I say like multimedia learning and instructional design, each one of you has an image or what it might be. And it's usually related to your background, your prior knowledge, and so on. So this is just a simple example. So each one of these person has a different mental model of what they are seeing or feeling, because they have only one aspect or one angle of it. So one sees it as a brush, or one sees a trunk as a snake, and so on. And so if you have different mental models, if everyone's seeing the same thing but has different representation, this is where your assessment or your teaching has a gap in it, and where we try to fix it. So when you want to construct a mental model, if you're going to construct it from text, so if you have a text, a description of an image or a description of something or an explanation of a process, usually you can get some misinterpretation, and it can affect one's understanding of what you read, because what I read, I might perceive it differently or understand it differently according to my level and background than what you understand it. And so it requires some effort because it needs to be interpreted. So you have to interpret it, especially if it's something that you have to visualize. You're going to read it, you're going to try to have a mental model, imagine it in your own cognitive or in your brain. As opposed to pictures, it's usually construction is more direct, because we are going to see the same image, so we all have almost the same information. And when you usually present a picture with a text, that helps the reader even more. And this is some of the concept of multimedia learning. And so I'm going to say like three different broad glossaries so we can understand. So multimedia learning it's the act of learning from words and pictures. So like you are learning now from words and pictures. So when you teach your students, so what's the materials and stuff. The multimedia instruction is when you present these words and pictures to produce the learning. So it's the presentation. So now how are you going to use it, and what mode are you going to use it, and how are you going to present it? Cognitive overload is when the learner's intended cognitive processing exceeds the learner's available cognitive capacity. So what does it mean? It means that each one of us has a different way of processing the information, the cognitive processing. So if your cognitive process exceeds what you're capable and your mind is capable of, or the capacity of your mind, that's what you're going to have cognitive overload. And it's going to be more explained in the next slides. So when does it occur? It occurs when the processing demand, so when you have the demand of the processing of the learning task, so what are you going to learn at the presentation and in the ward or in the OR are greater than your processing capacity of the learner in the information processing system. Now the information processing system is in the brain, and this is where most of it is theoretical, and we're going to go and explain it in images, and I'm going to keep repeating it in different layers so we could understand it more. So the theory that constructed is the cognitive theory of multimedia learning. This we're talking about now multimedia only. So this theory, it tries to explain what the process takes place in your mind and how you can use multimedia to have something that's meaningful learning. So meaningful means that you understand it, you gain the knowledge, you understand it correctly, and it's attached or it's connected, linked with your prior knowledge to have a new meaning and where you can apply it to somewhere else. And the theory has clear implications for instructional design. So what the principles of the theories will guide you on how you develop your presentations or your materials or your assessment. So what are the assumptions? So there are three main assumptions in cognitive theory of multimedia learning. The first one, the assumption is called the dual channel assumption. Dual means two, so it means there are two channels. There are two separate channels or systems or processes in the human brain. One is for verbal and one is for pictorial information. So that's the general first principle. The second one assumption is called the limited capacity assumption. And the assumption is that each of these channels, so we have two channels, each of these channels has a limited capacity of holding and processing information at one given time. So whatever I'm telling you now, each of your system, the visual and auditory, has only a limited capacity of understanding what I'm saying and seeing and can process it for a certain time. And each one of you is different than the other. The third one is the active process assumption, is how you build the connection between these two channels. So when the information is processed in both these channels, how are you gonna connect these information from these two channels to have a meaningful learning? So we're gonna go on these three processes. So the first one I'm gonna talk about is a dual channel assumption. So dual, we said two, it means that you have an auditory input, something coming from the environment, and it's usually verbal. It can be verbal or auditory, so you can either hear it or you can talk, you say it. So these are verbal, specified as verbal input. And then you have visual input. So when you see something, you see the picture, you see the image, or you can see a text, you see something that you're reading. So it's a visual format. So it's not just image, you can see when you're reading. So this picture is the main is the information processing system in the brain, or this is the assumption, the hypothetical assumption that is in the psychology literature. And then so for this picture, I'm going to go through it. I'm going to break it down into different layers to understand. So the first thing I want you to understand is we said we're talking about now the dual process. So there are two systems. The first one is the auditory verbal channel, which is the first row, which has words here. We're talking about here words and ears. So this is the first channel. The second channel is the visual pictorial channel, where you have pictures and eyes. So this is the visual down here, and then the up is the auditory. So this is the first idea of the assumption. And then we're going to go into details later on. I'm connecting everything to each other. So the picture that I've put before, where the auditory goes in that, the first one in the auditory verbal, and then the eyes, the visual, goes in the pictorial. But we have to keep in mind that here, the words here has two arrows. One, because you can hear words as I'm talking. And the second thing, you can read words as you can read. So when you read a word, you're actually seeing it. So it can be translated into pictures. So words can be processed in two systems. And this is where it's important, where we think about cognitive overload. So I just briefly talked about this. I'm going to go now talking about what does active processing assumption mean. So active process assumption means when the knowledge is presented to the learner, so when we're presenting new information to the learner, it has to be transformed in the information processing system, the one that I showed you. And it usually has to go or gets transferred into 5 different modes or modalities in the whole process for you to understand it. So we come back to the picture again. We talked first about the 2 rows. Now I'm going to talk about columns. So we're going to have 5 columns. The first column is the words and pictures. So you're seeing words and pictures. So this information is going to come to you in the form of words and pictures, and this is what they call the physical representation. This physical representation has to go be processed in your brain. So it has to go and be translated. So the words, your ears hears it, and then the pictures or the reading that you hear will be translated to your eyes. And this is what we call the sensory representation. So the physical becomes a sensory representation. Now then this, from what I'm saying or what you're hearing, your brain is going to select certain words and certain pictures. And then that is going to have to be translated in your working memory. And we're going to talk about these memories. This is in the brain. So it gets translated into sounds and images. This is what's called the working memory representation. Now it goes on, when your brain selects these words and images, it has to organize it in a certain way. And then so it organizes it as verbal mode and pictorial mode. So this is where you're going to construct your verbal mental model and your pictorial mental model, like the elephant. This is where you're going to start forming your elephant, how it looks like. And then this is called the deep working memory representation. Now the final step is when all of this will link together, the verbal and the pictorial, and it's going to work with any prior information or knowledge you have, and it's going to be stored in the long-term memory, and it's going to be activated, and that's what's called the long-term memory representation. So this is called the active process. So we finished the first dual one, and we just talked generally about the active process. I'm going to go now talking about the limited capacity. I'm breaking it down just so you can understand, then we'll go into more complex as a whole. So we talked about the rows and the columns. So now we're going to talk about the limited capacity. So limited capacity means that what is the capacity? How much information can be stored? So we have three in the brain, or theoretically speaking, pioneers and theorists think that the information, when it comes to the brain, it goes into three, let's say, phases or parts in your brain, into the sensory memory, three memories, and working memory, and then long-term memory. So in the sensory memory, whatever information you get usually stays less than half a second or almost half a second, and then and you get this information from your sight and sound. And then this information is going to go into the working memory, where it's going to stay another 30 seconds. And this working memory has what they call a limited capacity. So it can store they call it 7 units, plus or minus 2. So it's some of them like 9 units or 12. So it's the information is like stored in units. It's stored for recall, but it doesn't stay there. In order for you to recall it, it has to be organized and stored in your long-term memory. And this has to click with your prior knowledge, so it can be permanent and unlimited capacity. Now, the thing that we're talking about here, there's the capacity. So in the working memory, there's limited capacity. So it just stores 7 to 2 units. So whatever we're saying in all this, your brain might just get 7 chunks of information or 7 modes of information. But the sensory memory, the one we're talking about here, and the long-term have unlimited capacity. You can see as much things as you want, and you can read as much as you want. It's unlimited. When you look in your room, you can see many things, and you can read many stuff, but only limited information and pictures are going to come here. Now, the long-term memory is unlimited. Your brain can store unlimited capacity of images and pictures. So the whole problem of cognitive overload usually arises here, in the how your brain is trying to process information. Of course, it does has effect, as we say, to the prior knowledge, cognitive overload, and how the information is given, and we're going to talk about that. So we talked about now the three assumptions: the dual channel, and then the active, how it's activated in the brain, and then how it's stored. So now we're going to talk about what is cognitive overload. So there seems to have their categories for cognitive overload, and they categorize it into something called intrinsic cognitive overload, extraneous, and germane. So the intrinsic has to do with any information. So when you have information here that's coming into your brain, either you're looking at it or hearing it, your brain is going to have so many information, pictures, images, and they're all connected to each other. And here it has to come to what we call the working memory in order to go and be stored in the long-term memory, okay? So the intrinsic cognitive overload, it deals with the difficulty of a task of a learner. So let's say this presentation is very difficult. There's so many concepts. So this is a complex, this intrinsic information is coming to you is complex. So it deals with the level, the complexity, and how difficult it is, the information. And so when you have this information going to the working memory, which is a limited capacity, it's going to affect how it's going to be stored in the unlimited capacity. So the easier the information is giving, the more it's delivered in a favorable way, the more it's going to be stored property in the long-term memory. So the intrinsic deals with the level and complexity of the information. That's the intrinsic idea. So if something is very complicated or difficult, or the level is difficult, you will have a cognitive overload due to the intrinsic part of the information. Extraneous factor has to do with additional load or imposed information that is unnecessary. Like I have in the slide, I have unnecessary background. You can't see the slide appropriately. So this is unnecessary information. So it's anything that doesn't contribute directly to the learning goal. So if my learning goal is to teach you this, I shouldn't put this complicated background. It causes some of the cognitive capacities when dealing with that information. So you want to have, so the idea of extraneous cognitive overload is what is the additional unnecessary information. So if this is the information I need, and these are all unnecessary information, either background music or let's say sound or unnecessary information or picture, that's going to affect the necessary information that I need to go to into the working memory, into the long-term memory. And so that's extraneous. So anything extra that is unnecessary. The last one is the germane cognitive load, or some of them call it the generative load. It deals with adding useful information and building of cognitive schema. So what does it mean? It means it is the information that you really want, the essential useful information that you want to give. And it has to do with how you're going to build your mental model or your cognitive schema. So this is information that's going to help you build your mental model. And so this mental capacity is generated from the new information with the existing knowledge. So when I give you this new information, the useful information that we want, and you have your prior knowledge, plus your prior knowledge, it's going to help give you the mental model that you need to where to be stored in your long-term memory. And so this is where you get, oh, and now I understand, this is the aha moment. This is usually because you got your useful information from the multimedia or the presentation or whatever you're looking at, and it clicks with something you already know. So when we're talking about the aim of the instructional design in your materials, we want to talk about how complicated a learning task is for the students. So we're talking about the intrinsic part. Is it too complex? Is it too much information in it? You want to reduce the distracting material, which is the extraneous load. And you want to encourage your germane load, which is the useful information. So that's the whole idea. So going back to the process. So when we're talking about the active process assumption, we said it's how your brain stores information, and we said it goes into 5 stages. And so when we said it goes into words and then goes into ears and so on. And then so when it's active processing, it also goes into 5 steps. You have to, 1, select the word, 2, you have to select the image. You need to then organize the word and image, so that's 3 and 4. And then 5, you need to integrate this word and image for it to click for the long-term memory. And so this has to do with the selecting part. So when you're selecting information, it has to do with reducing extraneous processing, the one we just said. When you organize your information, so when you're selecting here, you're trying to reduce any unnecessary information. When your brain organizes the word, you're trying to organize and foster essential processing. You want the essential germane information. And when you integrate, you want to, here you want to integrate the essential germane and intrinsic, and then here in the end, you want to integrate all the information you got so you can have a proper fixed knowledge or information. So again, I'm just going to keep repeating it so it comes understand. When you have the 2 modes of, so this is now putting it all together. When you have new information, new materials, new lecture, and it presents from the environment as a multimedia presentation, as we're doing now, your brain has to select the words and image, it has to organize it, and it has to integrate it. So first, the word is going to go, so my voice now, your ear is going to hear it, and the words you're seeing it is going to go into the eyes, and if this picture image is going to go to the eyes. Then your brain is going to select these words and images. It's going to translate it into sound and images. It's going to get organized in your working memory. It's going to be translated into a verbal mental model and a pictorial mental model. And this is where we need to make sure that the pictorial and verbal mental models we try to give to our students are correct. And then it's going to be integrated into the prior knowledge with the long-term memory. And this is where your information is going to click. And as we said, a multimedia, in the beginning, in the beginning of the process and the long term have unlimited capacity. However, working memory has limited capacity, and this is where the information is going to work and then get stored in the long term memory. So we want to work on the working memory. The information that's being given is appropriate. And important information that don't forget that words has 2 places. So we said this is a dual channel. Working memory has limited capacity, and then you have the active process. These are 3 assumptions that are built on the multimedia. So now, when we're talking about words and pictures put together, we want to focus on 3 ideas. And we're talking about instructional designs. Okay, now we're going to do your materials, how you want to do your materials, what are the things you need to consider. So we said you want to eliminate it. So the goal is for your materials to eliminate any unnecessary distractors. You want to encourage appropriate mental model through your materials, and then you want to facilitate the integration of these materials with prior knowledge to have meaningful learning. So the main principles you're going to hear about is Mayer's principles of multimedia instruction, and usually they have 12 principles. 5 of them are categorized to reduce the unnecessary processing, extraneous. 3 are for managing the essential, intrinsic processing, and then 4 are fostering the germane processing. So these are the principles. We're going to go briefly through it. And I'm going to simplify it as much as possible. Of course, there's so many concepts in each one. So we're going to talk about the coherence principle, signaling, redundancy, spatial, temporal, segmentation, modality, pre-training, multimedia, personalization, and then there's the voice principle and image. Now, the voice and principle and image, it's there, but it's not talked a lot. But the voice is about how you hear your presenter speaking, as just to hearing a robotic or let's say an electronic version of a voice. And the image principle talks about when someone's giving a presentation, sometimes, or the idea is if you see the presenter while you're listening or seeing the multimedia, sometimes it distracts. So that's why it's better to have the presentation without seeing the speaker, as we're doing now. So definitions for each one, simplifying as much as possible. Coherence principle, it means that it's the idea that you need to exclude extraneous or unnecessary words, pictures, and sound. So this is what a principle that you need to think about when you're doing. Signaling principle, you need to highlight essential material. So you need to signal something. So you're going to highlight it. You're going to either put a circle or something. I'm going to give you, show you an example. Redundancy principle has to do with not adding on-screen text to narrated animation. It means that if you have a video, which is an animation, and it's narrated, so you have an animation and then somebody's talking about it, so you hear somebody explaining something with the video, it's better not to have a text or written words at the same time. So that's called the redundancy principle. Spatial contiguity, it has to do with place, where you put your words or your text in accordance to the picture or graph when you're presenting it in the presentation or in your assessment. Temporal has to do with time, and it has when you put your animation and or your video, either your image and your text, how it appears. Does it appear at the same time or does one come before the other? So it has to do with placing it at the same time. And these first five principles, as we said, has to do with reducing the extraneous. So these are 5, reducing the extraneous processing. So to eliminate unnecessary information, you need to follow these 5 principles. Now, to have a good mental frame, you need to try to apply the segmenting principle when appropriate. So, of course, these principles, you can't apply all of them at once, according to your materials. So you need to present animation in a learner piece segment. Means you need to put it either into chunks, into a certain speed. So you give it to them into segments as opposed to a whole lecture or a whole 1-hour lecture. The modality principle, you have to present words as narration, spoken text instead of printed text. Means when you're giving an image or a video, it's better to have it in a voice or in a verbal audio instead of text. And this goes with the redundancy principle. So as we said, if you have an animation, you want to have audio with it as opposed to having a text with it. So those will go together. The pre-training principle has to do with preparing. You pre-train somebody, so you give them glossaries, you give them ideas, you give them names or locations. So when they come to the lecture, they have an idea of what you're talking about. So as let's say I give you about what is multimedia, I give you images or things about what is covered. So I give you a glossary. So before you come here, you have pre-training. And the last 2 principles, which facilitates the integration, integration with prior knowledge to be stored in your long-term memory, is the multimedia principles, is where it's good to present images and words at the same time. And the personalization principles is when you use conversational style. So we're talking in a normal, in an informal way. It's not in a formal dictate. So you have this kind of informality in it. And then some of these principles you can, or even more, you can apply to some testing. So these are some of the things that we noticed in some of the tests. So and this is just going to the selecting part. So when we're talking about the selecting word, so we're talking about reducing extraneous process, which we're going to be talking about this part here. So what can you do? So if we're going to take the first one, redundancy principle. So people learn better from animation, from video, with narration, with sound or somebody talking as I am doing now, than from animation with narration and text. So it means if I put you an image or a video, it's better to hear the voice rather than see the text, except sometimes if it's short text. So like, let's say these pieces of Lego blocks and I write colorful Lego, that's okay because it's a short text. As opposed if I write, this is a colorful Lego with blocks, some of them are 4 pieces, some of them are 6 pieces, some of them, and then I write all this text and you hear me saying it, that is the redundancy principle. It's better just me talking about the Legos when you see it, or I'll just put colorful Lego because that's the only thing I want you to see with the image. Now the spatial contiguity, it says where words need to be near a picture. So if we have like this image and this text, you want it to be near each other. So it's better visualized as one unit. The coherence principles, where we said you need to get rid of unnecessary extraneous materials. So anything you don't need, just check it out in your items, in your presentation. Of course, if you I have lots of unnecessary maybe information, but this is the purpose is for you to have it later. But that's the idea. Signaling principle is you want to highlight. So let's say this image, I want to highlight the envelope, so I put in arrows. This is highlighting. I'm signaling you to be directed to that piece of envelope. So that's signaling processes. And then temporal contiguity principle, it has to do with narrating and animating at the same time. So I'm talking and you can see the image at the same time. Now, when we go back to the information processing system and we want to talk about organizing, which has to do with foster essential processing. So what are the principles? We said about segmenting principles. So you need to present material in a learner-paced segment. So you have to put it into chunks. Instead of giving everything at once, you need to say, okay, this has to do with the anatomy part. This has to do with the glossary. This you're going to talk about the physiology, something like that. And then you kind of integrate it. So what do you decide? Or you can say, this is the definitions. These are the general factors. These are the risk factors and so on. Instead of giving it as a whole one presentation. So you need to give it in chunks, and then between these chunks, you have some time. And then there are some applications like Edpuzzle and PlayPosit and Nearpod where they help you give segmentation. So you can have a video and then you can ask a question or let them write a reflection and so on. Now, the pre-training principle, as I said, is I prepare you ahead of time. So I'll tell you, I would have given you information before, materials about what's cognitive load. I give you a video of what is working memory and what's domain load. Because when I come here, since you have an idea of what of each of these are, when you come here, you can link all of these concepts together and you have a better mental model. So that's the idea of pre-training principle. The modality, you present words as narration instead of text. So it means, and sometimes if there's so many words written there, you just need to remove it and just verbalize it. You narrate it. You record somebody's voice on it and then you just talk about it. So going into the last part is integration. So how to improve the integrating part. So the multimedia principle says that if you put words with pictures, we're not talking about narration, talking about words with pictures, it like this colorful Lego, it helps in understanding and storing the information better. The personalization, as we said, you have a conversational style, not a formal style. So we're going to talk about we, you used to do I and you instead of talking very formally to the candidate. This is, for some of you don't know, there's a YouTube channel called Osmosis where they present information and they talk about this, and you have the link down if you want to see it. So this was an example where they had a PowerPoint slide and they were talking about the gas exchange, and this is how the presentation was. And then using the multimedia principles and trying to fix the PowerPoint slides, you can see that some of the topics here were, or some of the words are reduced into points. They changed the image, they removed the emojis here because it was unnecessary extraneous. They removed this, and they write here what are the things that they've done. And the video is really nice. And then on adding more and fixing more of the presentation, this is how in the end it was presented. So this image here was translated into this, and then it had some narration, and then so this part of the right part of the presentation is how it was presented, to have less cognitive overload, because the image on the left has too many information, has unnecessary picture. Your brain is going to process all this unnecessarily. You're going to waste your energy. Your working memory is going to waste its energy on trying to process this and this unconsciously, even if you try to avoid it, and it's not going to have enough space to process the actual information. And so that's the idea of it. So when you're going to consider multimedia, what do you want to consider? You need to consider position of the multimedia. You want to consider the prior knowledge of your audience. What is the spatial or ability and the orientation of it? How are you going to use the multimedia? How are you going to remove irrelevant? And how are you going to construct cognitive schemas? So position, talking about position. So you can have a picture that's above the text and below the text, but each of these are going to have different aspects. So usually from the literature, pictures or presenting a picture above the text activates prior knowledge. And so it helps in recall and understanding. It helps in organizing the following text. So when you see the image, it's going to help you understand the text that's after it. It requires less cognitive effort. So your brain is not going to be wasting its time trying to analyze and interpret the text before looking at the image, because it's going to see the image, it's going to have a direct mental model of it and understanding, and then you're going to have less work on the picture, so you're going to have more work on understanding. So your capacity, let's say your working capacity, as we said, 7 units, let's say to look at the picture takes 2 units, and then you have 5 more units to interpret the text. And so you have enough space to process the text, as opposed to having a picture below the text. It means you're going to read the text first. So let's say you have an MCQ, you're going to read the text first, then you're going to have the image. Your brain is going to develop a mental model based on the text. So first you're going to read the text, you're going to have a mental model, and your brain's going to make a mental model on it. And your working memory might, let's say, use 4 working units to do this, which means you only 2 working units to interpret the image, which might be the most has an important aspect. And it's different from presented pictures that follow. So which means that when you have a mental model of the text, so let's say I'm describing a rash, your brain is going to imagine a rash, and then when you see the text, your rash that you imagined might be something not related to the image. You might see a rash of, let's say, eczema, and the image is something to do with impetigo or something else. And then so that you cannot like rewind and say, okay, delete. No, because your brain is already working and it has cognitive overload. It's difficult to erase that and start from over. So it interferes with the picture when it's being processed. And so that was to call the position. That has to do with the position of the multimedia. So when you call it, so when you have visual and verbal system, this is where you get your maximum information. So you can have it either as split or an integrated format. The split means that you're going to have the image on one side and the text on one side, but all presented there. The integrated, you have the image or the videos or whatever, and then you have the clinical scenario or your text that is integrated, or it's like supplementary materials. But the idea is you have to remember that it has to be simultaneous presentation. So it means they occur at the same time. You don't give the image and then the text. It's all appears at the same time as it is now. The text is to be close to the image. So as you see here, the text is close to the image and the text is close to the image. You don't have something far away. And the third thing is you don't want to have split attention effect, which means if it's not close to each other, you're going to have a split attention effect. So let's say you're doing it, but sometimes you can't avoid it. So let's say you're having an online either material or let's say an assessment, and you see the picture and the picture takes the whole screen, and then you have to scroll down to go read the text. So when you scroll down, the picture disappears from the your screen, and this is where your brain splits the information. You get split attention effect, and you want to try to avoid that. Now we talk about prior knowledge. Prior knowledge is important because it's used to select relevant information from multimedia. So if you have a previous knowledge and you have new information, it's going to help you create your mental model. Of course, this one differs according to the level of your audience. So it determines how easy the learner can interpret the visual representation. So which means that it's going to depend on the level of the learner's knowledge and their expertise in the content area. So if you're going to give something complex and they're novice, they're not going to have a proper mental model because they don't have something based on it. But let's say you're talking to a 50-year medical student and you're building on something that has been explained in year 3 and 4, they're going to have prior knowledge and mental prior knowledge. And with the new information that you're giving them in the 5th year, they can build a proper mental model. So then we're going to talk now just a bit about spatial ability and orientation. And this has to do with how you rotate the image mentally in your brain. So let's say we're just giving you a picture of a heart. So I'm giving to you in different versions. There's a difference between when you give an image as a 2D, a 3D, moving, or when you have a rotational image. And so as you present it, and either in a multimedia or exam, or as the candidates have the ability to imagine. So when you see a heart, different, each one's going to think about the heart differently. Some of you are going to see the heart as this simple aspect. Some of you might be cardiologists and see it this way. And then so your mental representation is going to help you in understanding the concept and transferring information. So this is where you think about the image and the cut frames of your selection. When you're giving, let's say, a lecture, or you're given a test, as we do like in test, we give one cut of a CT image. It's different when you give a cut where they can move and scroll through. And this one, and this affects how they interpret the question or the item. So like in one of our, in our system, some of the residents said that we usually in our practice, we get to see the different cuts of the CT, but in the exam, you direct me to one and it's not clear. I want to see above and below. And then so that affects their ability to understand the questions or to process the information and to answer. And then, so this has to do with the visual ability skills and working memory, and with the last has to do with the low ability students and high ability students. So usually low ability students don't have this mental representation structurally or advancedly formed in their cognition, as opposed to the high ability students. Sometimes there's advice that you should include significant and insignificant views, like let's say CTs, just so you don't guide or you don't cue the students to the actual image. Of course, it's going to depend on the level and the purpose of your assessment or your teaching. So again, things you think to consider are the color, because it identifies landmark and discrimination. So you can see the difference between if you give them something that's black and white or something where they can see the small squares and where they can have a proper understanding and missing information. So in this one here, you cannot see the small squares, as opposed when you give the red ones, you can see the 5 small squares. And then these are missing information that is not given properly. Or if you, as we said, text, if you're going to explain an ECG as a text, it's not the same when you give it as an image, because in the image you have the relationships of all these leads to each other that's not given in the text. You can see the actual height of the waves, which is not actually given in the text, and so on. I'm just going to give you examples, just like so you could think about. So this is like the signaling principle. So like I said, I'm explaining and I want to tell you where's the esophagus, where's the heart, and I signal it. So this is highlighting it. So it's highlighting the area. This has to do with like view and color of images when you would try to select it for explanation. This is the same image, but because it has different grids are used. So you can see that the first image on the left is not as clear as the third one on the right. And so you need to be careful which one you choose when you're trying to explain, let's say an X-ray and teaching, or when you give something in assessment in your examination, because it means that this is where it's become a bit unfair. Again, you might think about, you want to put some animated version of concept, see the stenosis, instead of just saying give an image, a static image, just one picture, and say it's stenosis. The exposure of an image, you can have, if some of the applications allows the residents or the students to actually change the exposure of the image so they can have a better understanding. So this has things to do with multimedia learning and then testing, if that could be applied. What's the student's view? These are different. There's a standard view, and there's like according to the lighting, there's the music view. So these two are the same images, but one is clearer than the other. So what are the views that you are giving when you're explaining or when you're assessing? And these all might affect or the item analysis. This is like if you have an exam, how you can give, so you can have your text here, you can have your audio when you play it, and then you can have your image here. So this is where you try to not have the split format where you don't, so everything is next to each other, appears at the same time. You're using the multimedia principle where you have text and you have image or audio at the same time. This is a different way of presenting. Of course, each time you do it and you see your analysis, this is where sometimes you need to think about, okay, maybe we should think about the multimedia, how it's affecting our analysis and so on. So when you're going to use animation, things comes with animation. You're going to have the buttons, the previous, the next, and this might add or it might be something good or it might be something bad that affects the load of information that you have. And again, we talked about like if you're going to have detailed clips or not, this is going to cause distraction or not. So these are things I added just for you so you could read later on. The pace, so is it fast? Is the video fast? Is it slow? Do I have the option to stop and pause, or is it not an option for me when I'm learning on a website or in the online platform, or when I have an assessment? How is the looping? When you have an image and then or a video and it's repeating itself, does it automatically loop, or do I have the chance to loop? Is the looping very quick though? So it's a 3-second video where it keeps looping and looping and it makes me confused, or is it a long video? So these are things you take into consideration. And then sometimes it's as simple as a simple image might be better than an animation. When we talk about unnecessary multimedia, so information is maximized when irrelevant information is removed. When we said we want to remove the unnecessary information, is the coherence principle. So you need to make sure that when you're adding your multimedia, you have to ask yourself and then check later on after you do the teaching or assessment, does it add information? Does it remove information? Does it cause confusion? So you sit down with your learners and you ask them and you go through the items that have problems, or you go through the learning and you see why some things are understood and why things are not understood. Duplication of information is when you have an image or a video and you have the text explaining it. So sometimes you have duplication that causes overload. And so this is just an example of an item that was presented as an image and another one presented as a text. And then when we look at the item analysis, so you can see the one with the image had a difficulty of 34. It means it was difficult. Only 34% of the students answered it, as opposed to the same question, but it was given, instead of giving an image, we gave them the explanation. So we just said empty uterus and so on. So we didn't give them the multimedia, we gave them the text. But because we cued them to it, they 72% answered, so it was much more easier, and it discriminated much better and so on. But then this is where you decide, do I want to give it to them as text? Do I want to give it as multimedia? And then you say, okay, why was it difficult when I gave multimedia? So when we asked them, and some of them, their comments, they had said that we could answer anyway the question without the image. So the question had the necessary information, that the image was extra and it distracted them. So it caused cognitive overload. And so that's why some of them didn't see it. It was maybe a waste of their time. It made them think that it's something they need to look for it, and they didn't need to look for it because it's just an empty sack, and so on. So you sit with your students and you see why you added. And so, like say for this time, this question, you're going to say, okay, I might not need the image. I'll just remove it, and then you just keep it as an item with bits with a text, because it also has very good discrimination. And so when you're thinking about multimedia, you want to construct your cognitive schema or mental model, you think about its spatial ability. So how is it going to be according to the space in your mind, and it's presented in the scenario, and how it deals with prior knowledge, because it affects on your previous knowledge. And there's the interface design principle, and has to do with computering and the space on the computer. Much white space is there? Where's the word? Is everything on there? Is there a frame or not? So it has to do with how the material appears on the screen, because it has to do with the lighting and the color and so on. And then you're going to think about the level when you're thinking about constructing your cognitive schema, or how you want your learners to construct a proper cognitive schema, is, are they experts or are they novice? Because if they're experts usually when they see an image, they have a global focal search. So they see something general, and then they know focally, they know exactly where to look for the lesions. So that's because they have a rich knowledge base, and because they have more knowledge and expertise, and so they need shorter time to view something. So your interpretation of an image is not the same as a novice, because the novice has superficial search. He doesn't know what he's looking for. He has going to just keep looking and doesn't know where to look in the x-rays, and look up, down, right or left. He only has pieces of information, and it's weakly linked, and so he has a longer viewing time, so this is things you need to consider. Okay, the other thing is instructional guidance. So if there are things that has to do that, are you giving instructions to the students either in the learning platform or in your assessment, because that's going to help them understand what they need to do, and that affects how their interpretation of what they're going to read. And the language, so it has to do with the language. Are your sentences limited into certain length? Are they very explanatory when you're talking about the media or when you're writing your questions? Did you review the selection of words that's related to the item itself or to the teaching material? Did you close terminologies that are unfamiliar and or phrases that are unnecessary, and so on? So you have to think about this. Now I'm not going to go through this. I wrote the slides for you just to go look at. So when you want to relate to testing, you're going to think about four, let's say, categories. You want to think about the student's perspective, the faculty's perspective, what are the technical issues and content. So I have it here as different questions for you to think about. I'm not going to go through it all because you can go through it, but it's just the idea that from a student's perspective, you need to see what do they think of the multimedia. So you just want to let them take their feedback on it. Did it help them? Did it not help them? Why was it help them? Was it fair or not? So these are just questions for you to go back to when you have the lecture to see. From the faculty's perspective, what do they think about it? Was it easy to do? Did they have the necessary materials? Did they have resources and capabilities? Was they think it's worthwhile or not? And did they have enough time or skills to actually do it? Or was it more burden that they couldn't deliver the materials? You go into the content, you need to think about, okay, are you gonna have it like if an exam is it you're gonna do it as a computer-based test because you want to have multimedia? You're gonna have it a paper-based test, and why? So you need to think about your purpose and what's your idea about it. Can it enhance? Can the multimedia version enhance your paper? Do you want to test something higher cognitive? That's where you're gonna add it. What are the things you need to think about? The instructions, the computer, how is it gonna look like, and so on. And then you're going to have technical aspects. What are the equipment, the logistics? Is it secure? Is it expensive? Do you have the manpower? Is the technology powerful enough to realize the capabilities? And you're going to see your pros and cons regarding to it. Other issues, you're going to think of financial issues, and you're going to think about the outcome and the impact. Does it have a positive impact and a negative impact? Because you might have something very good, but then the negative impact that most of your students don't understand in the learning, or most of your students fail because it's too complicated or there's a missing idea. So you have to see what is the impact on it, even if it's a valid and appropriate material. So when we come to item analysis, if you look at the literature, there's mixed ideas. So some of them, they say we don't know. It adds to the test, or sometimes positively, and some say it adds negatively. Some say, let's say for item difficult, does it make an item difficult? You'll find different. Some of them say more difficult, some of them say it doesn't change, and some of them say it's less difficult, and the same thing is for discrimination. So you're going to find different aspects, and then you're going to have to review these articles and say, okay, what did they do, what did they didn't do, and then did they see the students, did they review materials, and then this is where we did some research and we checked. So you have to think that generally, all the papers generally agreed on the idea that usually scores were greater when you had multimedia in your assessment. It increases the validity of the test items, because if you're doing more clinical, you would try to have more things to see and interpret than having it as text. It's more discriminating, and it has more improves diagnostic accuracy for the expert and novice, and this helps in the validity. So what are some of the things that made the item more difficult when you had multimedia? So if I put an X-ray in a question or a video, what are the things that made the item more difficult from a research? So if the item was not clear, it affected the examinee's mental model. So if you had a proper image, but the item was not clear, that affected the multimedia, because they had different mental models, they had cognitive overload, it wasn't understand. The quality issue of the material, if it wasn't good, it affected on their ability to see the item. Was it more authentic or not? So if the item was very authentic and it's very relevant to the clinical scenario, you can't have any hints. So you're going to imagine that it's going to be more difficult, because if you don't know the answer to how to, let's say, identify the lesion in the X-ray, you're not going to be able to. So it's going to be more difficult. But this is maybe what you want, because you want to discriminate between high and low ability students. It tests higher cognitive skills, so that's why it's perceived as more difficult. If you replace it with textbook terminology, so if a textbook terminology, so let's say if you're saying the thumb the thumb sign, thumbprint signed in the X-ray. Having the text might cue them to the answer's epiglottitis as opposed to having it as an image. So sometimes having it as an image, if they memorize it as text as a sign, but you give it to them as an image, sometimes they perceive it more difficult because they're used to seeing it as a terminology. The multimedia is more difficult. It had no relation to the item at all. So as the ultrasound that I showed you, they felt it had no relation to the item. They could have answered it without the item. So it made it more difficult for them. If it contained unnecessary redundant information, if the image didn't fit with the verbal material. So let's say you put something, but it has nothing to do with what you're saying. That made it more difficult. If you had cross-sectional images, so usually CTs, MRIs, they're perceived as more difficult than X-rays. Their interpretation is more difficult. So items with that, you're going to find lower marks on it, but that's okay. But it depends on the level, but you just have to understand that if you have exams with so many cut cross-sectional images, you have to think, do you need to review these items? Are they good? Do you need to review your cut score and so on? Other things, if they had left labels, so let's say in your learning or in your assessment, you didn't put some labels, you didn't put, like in the ultrasound, I didn't put the probing, where the probe was, or what is the direction, or it was too zoomed in or out, that confused the candidates, so they didn't understand how to perceive the image as it is. If the video was a short loop, so it's a very short video and it just kept repeating itself, that made it more difficult. The spatial orientation, if it wasn't clear, if there was not enough information to understand where it is. So let's say I had a zoomed in ultrasound where they didn't know, is this the stomach, is this the lung, is this the heart? And because it's too zoomed in, so they don't know where it is according to the space in the body or the position in the body. Their expectations, so they might expect that the question is all text, and then you give them, and you don't inform them, and you let them practice, and they have a multimedia exam. The shock and the difficulty of seeing this is going to make it more difficult for them. Their learning style, of course, those who don't like multimedia might not do well. The choices of words that you put in accordance with the image will affect their interpretation. So when was it easier, the multimedia in your exams? When you had visual skills and clinical expertise. So like some of the specialties, like let's say radiology, pathology, histology, where they're used to seeing, or cardiology, where they're used to seeing ECGs and images, this was perceived as easier because they like to see it as opposed to translating it into text. When the content involved motion or movement, so if I'm explaining hip reduction and flexion, if I write it down in hip reduction and flexion, it's more confusing. It's easier if they just see the actual examination. So that's when you put the videos. When it was so clear, it acted as a cue. So sometimes the image is just clear. Just give them an X-ray. It's so clear for them. It is what it is. So because they're using it in the clinics or in the labs, they see it appropriately, so it's easy for them. And when the pictures were mental models directly from, so you see the image and you directly mental model. And of course, the learning style. So I just put some of them for the discrimination. When was it appropriate, discriminating or not? So these are just factors you can go through it. It's like we said if it's cross-sectional, like a CT or image, because it's more difficult, it might make the discrimination higher. If you have usually some literature, some of the fracture images were perceived as more difficult. If the item was the actual item or the question was medium difficult or high, it's going to be more discriminating. So when you have an image with it, if the item cognition was higher, so if the question had more cognitive, higher cognitive skills that you're trying to test, it's going to be more discriminating. And if it's unexplained, there's no difference. So sometimes you just don't know why it's more why it's different. Now the duration, you can imagine that if you have multimedia, sometimes the duration is going to be longer because it's more complex and difficult. It has to do with difficulty level of the item. He needs to look for the sign. He needs to repeat the video. The quality of the multimedia wasn't appropriate. So they need to spend more time to understand it. And this has to be taken into consideration when you're going to add multimedia into your tests, because you're going to have to see, factor in the duration of the item. Instead of being 1 minute, you might need to have 3 minutes for multimedia items. This is where you're going to try to calculate it when you have computer-based testing. You're going to have it. So these are some of the reasons why they had to spend more time. Why did they spend less time on a multimedia? If you see the some of the questions, one, it could be that it was so clear that it's like a spot diagnosis. It was easy for them because that's what they're used to seeing. And sometimes there's not enough time to answer. They're just gonna answer anything because they know they don't know the answer. They're just gonna choose anything. So it doesn't have to do with the multimedia as much as that they don't have time to answer. And sometimes it's too difficult that they know they don't know it. They're just gonna select anything. They're not gonna waste their time on that item. And sometimes because it resembles the clinical setting. So from our observation that like residents who preferred seeing ECGs and answering it more quickly than when they see it as a text, because they could imagine the anatomy of the heart on the ECG and answer it. And so these are just some of the comments that they had. So as we said, you just need to sit down with them and check why they felt it was good or not. And then, so this goes again to your validity, adds to your validity. So if you're gonna replace multimedia, it will give a high validity or higher validity, let's say, adding to your validity evidence that you can't say. So it's gonna add to your evidence that, okay, according to multimedia, we went to the multimedia principles, our images are good, we checked the item analysis, and then this is where you use evidence to build the why it's good to keep it or not. You're just gonna say, let's say, based on the research or the examination we did, there's higher cognitive skills, but you have to know that there's no medium better than other. You can't say audio is better than image, X-ray is better. There's no, you cannot. After you do it, you're gonna check your analysis, you're gonna check the feedback from your students, and based on that, you decide. You're gonna find some literature that says like extended matching questions with and without images produce different results than MCQs. Again, you use these as information to guide you to use them or not. And the estimation is that multimedia adds to reliability. And then in the end, I just compiled this for you to go through later on, like a checklist. So when you're thinking about multimedia in your material, you need to think about the purpose and relevancy of it, the quality, what is the content, does it add to the content, are you going to put 2D or 3D, what's the dimensionality, what's the view, is it a single view or not, what's the color of it, what are the features, is it still or dynamic, relationship to the text, is it going to be before or after, above or below, what is the screen size, what is the interface of the computer if you're using, is there going to be scrolling, looping, and so on, what are the required skills that are required, do they need to know how to use an iPad or iPhone or things, these are all things you need to consider. What is their expectations, the students' expectations of the assessment or of the learning, what is the time that you need to think of, you're going to need to adjust your cut score or your learning like marks, and then your copyright issues. So in conclusion, you need to be familiar with the principle of multimedia, the choice of multimedia, is it relevant, is it important or not, and does it yield good psychometric properties, and you need to seek feedback. I'm just going to give you as an application 2 simple examples of how, like a scenario, and what's the problem. So let's say one of the problems of cognitive overload is that one of the channels, either the verbal or the pictorial, is overloaded. And then let's say the topic is, and I'm a student and I want to see how the heart beats. And I went on Google or on YouTube and I checked and I see an image or a video. And it was a 2-minute video animation, and it had the steps, and it has talks about the steps and the chambers and everything. But while I'm looking at the video, there was a text that is appearing at the same time. At the same time I'm looking at the video, at the same time there's text that's talking about what's happening. So now here, this is how it looks like, okay? So you have the video up and then the text down. Now this one is going to cause a split attention, because I have to, while I'm looking at the video, I cannot read the text. And then while I'm looking at the text, I can't see the video. So this is going to cause a split attention, where the information is going to be split between viewing the animation and viewing the on-screen text. So this is what you try to avoid. And this is what happens. Your words that are here that you need to read is going to be split going into the eyes. That's one process. And you're looking at the picture is going to be split. So you're selecting the image as cognitive overload. So your information from both these words and pictures, you're going to just be selecting very few things to go here. So you're not going to get the whole information. So you need to reduce from here and take it up somewhere there. So what you're going to do, you want to split the load between these two. So you say, okay, maybe it's better to remove the text, have an audio at the same time as the video, and you can put some words next to the text that helps it. And then so that's gonna reduce between, I just need to look at the video, I'm gonna listen to what they're saying, and then you're just gonna cue to me some words, and then that's where you're gonna use the modality effect, where you are gonna understand the multimedia better when I have the words narrated. It's in verbal with the animation instead of the text as previous. So this is one thing what you do, and this is what you call offloading. So you're trying to offload from the all of the load on here. You want to offload it to have split. So this is like one example. Another example, if you're going to take the same video, let's say it's a very complex video, it has so much information, and the presentation was very fast. So he's talking so much, give me so much information, and there's not enough time for my brain to process this information. I was talking about the anatomy, that's going to go to the chambers, that's going to go to the sinus, and so my brain is not processing it. I won't have enough time to engage into the deeper understanding. So it means that in the mental model, my words are not going to be translated properly to verbal model, and my images are going to be translated into visual models. And then so in the integration at the end, I'm just going to have a very limited understanding. So what's the solution? You want to segment, to make it into bite-sized segments. So you're going to have the opportunity to select words and images, and you're going to have the time and capacity to organize it. And then so this is what you're going to use to segment. So you're going to make the video, let's say 5 minutes of 2 minutes, you're talking about anatomy. You have a break where I can pause and go to the next section when I want, and then I can go see the chambers, and then I can go see how the physiology of it, and so on. So the student has the opportunity to see the videos and segment. If you don't have the opportunity to segment because the material you cannot segment it, then you might want to use, let's say, the pre-training effect. You're going to say, okay, next week we're going to have this topic, it's complicated, so here are some materials to understand these chunks of information, like glossaries or stuff, and then when they come, they can have the proper mental model. And this is what we call the pre-training effect when I give materials. I've added some videos later on for you to see, and I think this is the end of the presentation. I'm assuming you all have cognitive overload because it's a complex topic, but if there's any question, we can take or see if there's anything you want me to clarify.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Thurayah Katan, for this wonderful presentation. And participants, if you have any question, please raise your hand. Yes, yes, Dr. Ali.
Good evening, Dr. Thurayah. You always entertaining and informative. I'm sure I enjoyed every piece of this lecture, though my cognitive is super loaded, but the subject is quite interesting. I have a couple of maybe comments or questions. Sometimes, like you mentioned, these principles of doing for the instructional designs for learning and teaching. But sometimes the timing, we do that, like the multimedias, everything is perfect, but it's going to take, for example, 2, 3, 4 hours. Maybe in the residency program, it's going to take the half day. So I just how can I adjust between not to over bombarding the memories and the timing and finishing whatever I have to, make sure that the student is learning. So I think 3, 4 hours giving lots of information, though I, follow the principle you've just mentioned, but still the timing is a big issue for the cognitive load. So I just need your input here, Doctora, please.
Well, I think so this is, I think, where some of the methods of like flipped learning come in, where some things you might say, of course this is going to take time from the instructor, where you're going to say pre-record or send materials that are already there, like videos, like I said, let's say like osmosis, where there are things that are already there that they can see. And then when you come, you explain the necessary information. That's one way. But of course, that means that you either have to have the proper material or you have to do it yourself. It's going to take time. But the other thing is that, let's say, if you have some information that can be sent before in simplified versions, like in fact sheets, or you're going to say the concept. So let's say if you're talking about, so what's your specialty, Dr. Madia? I'm going to find an example.
No, I'm a rheumatology, in the field of rheumatology, and member of the SSME, Riyadh.
Okay, so let's say you're in rheumatology, you're going to want to talk about rheumatoid arthritis, and you're going to talk about the factors and what are the rheumatoid, like the markers and stuff. So let's say before that, you can have, but of course, what I'm going to say is not what you only can do, because it has related to, of course, as a program or as a unit, or it's something that has to, it's like a kind of changing the culture and the mindset. You're going to have to, let's say, okay, in the beginning, let's say, of every rotation or every topic, you go on this website or whatever, here are the like general glossaries that you need to know. What does the information mean? What are the markers that you're going to have? So you give a like basic small video. So when you come, you're not going to waste your time talking about that, because let's say you're going to say different markers, different symptoms. I'm going to just be overloaded from the beginning. So you're going to have to find a way, if you can offload it in a different way, in a visual way, or you say, I'm going to give you these extra information, and the extra information, you have to go and read it by yourself. Of course, the problem is that we feel we need to give them the information because we know that this is the only time we have, and we know that they're not going to go read. And this has to do a lot with how your assessment is, like if you have formative assessment or not. So it's actually a whole system. In the end, you're going to have to give it as, let's say 3 or 4 hours, but let's say you're going to give, let's say, the first chunk it into 15 minutes, because if you chunk it into 15 minutes, then you give between these 15 minutes something, a question, a video, a reflection, a case, that's going to help in chunking at least, and because you're going to take a break. So you're going to talk about the anatomy or something about, or let's say about the symptoms of some of the rheumatology, and you're going to say, okay, we're going to give a scenario, we're going to show a video of somebody giving it. So their brain is going to take a break of that and trying to see this video and link it to what they've seen. And then after another 15 minutes, you're going to explain something else. So you're going to break your topic, not just into segments, but between those segments, you're going to do something, make a quiz, not the actual quiz, you know, like the fun quizzes, or ask them to reflect on something, or you ask them, you use them of these tools that come, you know, like the Mentimeter and stuff, and you say, what do they think? You can give an item, and a question, and say, what do you think the answer is and why? So you need to break it down in between these, let's say 15 minutes of information. You have to do something, a game, something to break that. That's kind of the segmenting that you can use for the 3 or 4 hours. You're going to try to use different ways of giving the information. Instead of you explaining, you're going to show them a video for them to see. Of course, you cannot control what they get and what they can't get. You can only do what you can do, but this is how, most probably the only thing you can do in this 3 hours is segment it and chunk it into information, and then give supplementary materials that are very simplified, like the infographics and stuff, and direct them to that. Again, they have to have their own self-learning, directed learning, where they're going to have to be pushed to read. I don't know if that helps. Unless you have the idea of you can pre-record something and send it, so you have the presentation. The other thing you can do is, if you have your presentation, then you can audio record your voice on it, and you send it to them later on, so they have the option of listening to it again and pause and stop whenever they want. I think I find that to be good. So if you have your presentation ready, just audio record it, and then after the lecture, after you give them, you send it to them, you say, whoever didn't understand something, then here's the recording, so they can chunk it at their own time. They can just see the first 10 slides, and after an hour they see the second 10 slides. So you give them a reference for them to get back to. And then if it's utilized or is the متداولة بينهم, it means that the next level, they're going to have this already, then they might see it. So when they come to you, they already know what is there because they're going to see it. And this is where you're going to change the idea.
Thank you very much. It's just like the other comments, like you talked about the splitting, when images and text, it is going to distract whoever is reading. Just like a very simple, it's a daily life. When you're watching a movie and read the subtitles or the translations, most of the time you don't remember what's going on. You don't see the image. You just look at that. That's very destructive.
Exactly.
So I quite agree with your impression in this regard. Thank you very much, Dr. Thurayah. I'm looking forward to, inshallah, meeting with you inshallah in the near future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. There is one question by Dr. Ahmad. He has asked that if we want to put videos or quiz during our PPT slides, what do you think, what pace we should keep? After how many minutes of starting presentation we should put some quiz or a video which doesn't increase load on students' brain?
Yeah. So if you're in a test, it's going to be much different, because it means if you're going to have a quiz or a test and you're factoring in the time, how long is your video or image or your video is going to be? I mean, I'm assuming, what we've seen, literally, I think they said 10 to 12 seconds, but that's even too much, maybe. But you might have, it depends on your specialty. Like if you're psychiatry and you need to have a debriefing or something, their videos might be 1 or 2 minutes. So it depends on again, what is the purpose of your assessment and how long you're going to give. But as I say, if in our assessments, and we tried to keep it less than 10 seconds. So it's enough time to see what is there and answer. But again, when we see the analysis, some of them it works. Some of them said the video was too long and it was just 10 seconds. So then that's where you're going to go try to reduce it. Maybe 5 seconds is enough. And some of them said 10 seconds was not enough and you need to increase it. So again, there's no fixed number. Usually you have to see your time and your purpose, and you have to go back. But if you're talking about exams or even in a lecture, if you used to have it so many minutes, they might in the end, like those off. Is it 1 to 2 minutes maybe, and then you give them something else. The other thing is which kind of video is better, animated videos or real-time videos? I'm not sure what you mean real-time videos. You mean something they're seeing now, like in the clinic, and then as animated
yes,
as
the
cartoon?
recorded one. The recorded one.
Recorded. So again, it depends on the purpose. So there are experiences where if you're gonna pre-record something and send it to them and they see it and then you come and give the information, so it's like the flipped learning. Some topics is better that way as opposed to real topics, and some are not. Again, so anything you do, you have to ask why are you doing it, what's the purpose, and then you have to see the education impact. I think that's something we don't look at. So if you're going to say, I'm going to pre-record it and send it, and then I'm going to come to the lecture and I'm just going to tell you, you have to see it before, I'm going to come to the lecture, I'm going to cover the basic concept as if the summary of what I pre-recorded, and then there's the time for you to ask questions on what you didn't understand, and this might help you identify the students who are struggling, and you find it working for you, then that's a good education impact. But if you do it and then they do not see the videos and then they don't come and they attend and you're just repeating whatever you've done, then maybe you feel that this is not happening now, it's not good. You have to always check the education impact, which means you're going to have to check at the end the marks or the learning, did they have their learning objectives or not. This is not about better or not, it depends according to your context, according to your level, according to your specialty, your time. There's so many factors. But I think maybe the thing that we can do is segmenting it into chunks, and maybe having the idea that you can have both. You can give it, some people prefer live, they don't prefer a distance. So it's something you're going to have to explore with your students. Again, you're going to find people saying, literature saying this and that. There's no right and wrong, but I think it's something we need to think about when we're giving, because something everyone's struggling with all the time. Yeah, the Australian Medical College in Australia, they transformed everything into flipped learning. All the lectures was flipped. They pre-recorded it. They have fixed sessions where they come and discuss the topics, and then they have a time off where they can go and have the questions. So, and they found that working for them, but it took around 1 or 1.5 years to transform everything into pre-recorded chunks of materials and then aligning it with the objectives. So it's again your capabilities, your organization. Yeah. So there's no wrong or right answer. It's just yeah. It's just
any other question from participants before we end our session? Any other questions?
Cognitively overloaded. Maybe when they see the video.
If no question, then I would like to thank Dr. Thurayah Kattan, because you have wonderfully presented, especially cognitive load theory, which is not very easy to make it clear so easily. And you have wonderfully explained the principles of multimedia with examples, which is really very much helpful for listeners, I think, right now. Thank you very much again, and thanks to all participants to join us today. Hope to catch you at some other point, inshallah.
Inshallah. And thank you for having me and for your time, for staying.
Yes.
Thank you all.
So good night. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye. Oh, I think yeah.